What's the most refreshing act of I don't give a duck that you've ever witnessed? My high school had what was a beauty pageant for senior dudes. It raised money for their prom. It was always in good fun. But one of the competitions was a swimsuit walk, and to keep things from going too far, speedos were banned. That did not, however, stop one guy from wearing his mom's bikini in front of an auditorium full of classmates and teachers. It was as revealing as one would expect, and I have no idea how nobody stopped him before it was too late. Went to the city court to pay off a ticket. I was upset because the wait was about an hour and a half plus. Who enjoys paying for a ticket? Finally my number gets called, and as I sit down at one of the desks, an older man walks in and sees the ridiculous amount of people waiting in the man says, "Duck it, I'll just go to jail," loud enough for some of us to hear, then walks out of the building. The lady at the desk didn't think it was funny, but it made my day. Saw a kid playing in a mud puddle at a park. The dad was all, "No buddy, you're gonna get all muddy." The kid slowly sat down in the puddle and reclined in it, dipping the back of his hair in the puddle, then sat up quick, whipping muddy water in the air like a Pantene commercial. That was my son. Guy at my work making over 100k is getting it for something stupid for the last time from this supervisor that nobody likes. Doesn't say anything. Leaves all his it. Gets up and walks. 2 days later, he's got a raise and doesn't have a supervisor anymore. In high school, a friend of mine got piss loaded drunk. I mean, it's a miracle he didn't end up in the hospital. And he didn't have a drive home from the party, so what does he do? He calls the police and says, "Yeah, there's some drunk ducker walking up 3rd Street yelling," and what does he do then? Walks up 3rd Street till they pick him up and drive him to his mother's house. I was at the gym recently and overheard a guy talking on the phone to someone who I presume was his wife. The conversation went something like this: "I just need another 10 or 15 minutes to finish up. Just another 10 or 15 minutes. Just another 10 or 15 minutes. Just another 10 or 15 minutes. Just another. Okay, fine, I'm leaving now." He then hung up and spent the next 10 to 15 minutes finishing up his routine. Watched a man get half tripped up by an elderly woman while rounding a corner. He dropped his drumstick. I scream, "Cone, has this happened?" He looked at the woman, who was apologizing profusely, stared for a few seconds, then pulled another drumstick from his pocket. He then carried on without saying a word to anybody. Was on a ferry one day, standing next to a guy on the ledge. Guy was texting. Dropped his iPhone into the sea. He just looked over for a second and pulled out some gum from his pocket and chewed on it and continued looking at the islands passing by. I looked at him once and he just shrugged briefly. At a New England boarding school, there was a kid who can best be described as a modern Mark Twain character, X. He grew up living on a boat, didn't wear shoes to places if he thought he could get away with it, etc. He was expelled just a few days before he graduated, I think for drug use, but possibly one too many alcohol infractions. With nothing to lose, he took off all his clothes and walked stark naked from the dean's office back to his dorm. We were at a party in high school, and my buddy is wasted. Some girl comes over and starts yelling at him about him telling his ex-girlfriend to duck off. When she was trying to explain why she cheated on him, he calmly stands up, goes over to my friend's refrigerator and starts looking around without speaking. The girl goes, "Are you even listening to me?" from across the kitchen. My buddy then, like a rubber band snapping, pulls out a Kraft Singles piece of cheese and throws it straight at her, and it hits her in the forehead. He walked downstairs to the basement and passed out like 5 minutes later. I was driving behind a person wearing a hat driving their convertible with the top down on a nice summer day. For some reason they leaned their head out the car and their hat flew right off in the wind. Without missing a beat, they reach over to their passenger's seat and put another hat on their head. Kept driving like nothing happened. At my last job as an insurance adjuster, we had this guy who was always perpetually pissed at management for perceived injustices. Well, one day they bring us into a meeting to describe to us a bunch of workflows, and he just rails on them, even going so far as to get up on the board in the room, drawing a pie chart and forcing the directors to admit that they are making us do more work than reasonable. He was reprimanded afterwards, but it was nice to see that somebody thought the same way I did. I used to work on reception of an upscale hotel. He had an elderly, mid-80s, gentleman working as concierge who would spend his shifts chatting away to guests. He was likable and charming and often got away with being a little inappropriate. One day two ladies check in for a spa weekend. As he's walking away, rolling their luggage, I overhear his conversation. He asked them where they were from, and they replied Halifax. His response: "Oh, I once had violent sex with a girl from Halifax. Lovely little town." They laughed. Old people can get away with all sorts. Edit. For clarity, Halifax, UK, not Nova Scotia. At a high school party where everyone was drinking underage and there was around 90 people. I'll never forget watching the cops pull into the driveway and seeing every single person take off sprinting into the cornfields. Rural area with a mile of corn 500 feet from the house. And with everyone sprinting away from the cops, one guy sat in a lawn chair and continued to drink his beer while everyone else was running around. I was watching it from the bed of my truck hiding. I worked at a call center for a while to ethic, as we all know, is hell on earth. Had a co-worker look my dead in the eyes and say, "Thanks for calling Verizon. Go duck yourself," and hung up. He then proceeded to log out for a 2-hour lunch. He came back, but was quickly escorted out. Few years back a friend of mine was working retail with me, just moving skids to the floor and stuff like that. At the time we had a huge asshole of a GM constantly demanding more work and a harder hustle, just being a D in general. Well, my pal was leaving for a new job and was already past his time just helping out with extra work we had when he could have just gone home. Coffee in one hand, pallet jack in another, dragging skids around when our GM stops him and asks him, "Where are you taking that skid?" "Don't warehouse it, put it on a top shelf out in one of the aisles." Essentially what he was asking was for my friend to take maybe 60 plus boxes of small product off a skid and up on a shelf out of reach on the retail floor. And to top it off, he also wanted him to unbox them all first. Literally the most tedious, redundant task you could be doing. My friend just dropped the skid where he was and said, "You do it," and left the building. One day at my old job, my old boss called everybody together because the upper management decided to cut some people out. This old lady overheard it from the bathroom, and then she zoomed out of there, grabbed her stuff and left before she could get properly fired. She then called the HR to tell them she was getting her paid vacation that was on hold, and hung up the phone before the HR could respond. And she turned off all possible contacts, like cell phone and emails. Then she took 30 days of paid vacation plus 4 days of paid sick leave plus 29 days of absence. In my country, the law says you can be absent for 29 straight days without being fired for just cause. When she came back, she was properly fired without just cause and got all benefits like unemployed insurance etc. TLDR. Old lady took a 30-day vacation, 4 sick leave and 29 days of absence before she could get properly fired. Went to one of the nicer theaters in town. A cool date night place that most people get moderately dressed up for. Place serves actual food, and it's good food too. Reclining, reserved leather seating, a bar, the whole 9 yards. There was a lady, mid-50s, early 60s, there with her husband. She was in PJs, wrapped in a blanket, carrying a pillow, and having her husband, dressed in khakis and a polo, collect tons of children's candy, and just sits down in her ducking cocoon of blankets and snacks. This lady is my inspiration. She gave 0 ducks about how out of place she looked, and just wanted to be comfortable in the theater. It was awesome. A guy last week at the cinema, full on ishi and fried chicken. He was just full not care. Dude around here takes his 2 pet rats with him everywhere he goes. To the shops, to the pub, you name it, just brings them with him. I worked in a craft cocktail bar for a while, and a guest was complaining that the drink she got didn't match her preferences. She was being rather rude and condescending, and wouldn't give anyone a direct answer as to what was wrong with the drink. A guest to her right asked, "What did you ask for?" She replied, and the guest, without hesitation, grabbed her drink. He finished it in one chug, looked her straight in the eye, and said, "That's exactly what you described, and it was delicious. Don't be a bitch." We bought him all of his drinks the rest of the night. I heard a story from a friend of mine who is an engineer. He was on the site when a new younger supervisor came on site. Young guy trying to prove himself. and the young supervisor sees the crane operator reading a book in his crane. It's his break time. They were high up in the building and could see him reading the book. Supervisor asked why he is allowed to do that, and trying to make a point decided to send the guy home and make a point of him costing the company money to work, not read books, even though he explained he was taking his lunch break and that's what he enjoys. Just reading his book and sipping his coffee. It also doesn't make sense to climb however many feet down for his lunch break. Anyways, the supervisor sends the guy home and the high up boss comes on site an hour later and sees the crane operator isn't there. He asks and the other people explain what happened. Turns out that crane operator is one of 3 people in the country at that time that can operate that crane. Apparently the supervisor got fired. Crane guy got a raise and is allowed to read his damn book whenever he wants. I didn't witness this myself, but it's a classic family story. My uncle grew up in East Germany, and as a young doctor was trying to get an apartment of his own. The way things were in the DDR, you could only get an apartment assigned to you by this one bureau. I don't remember what it was called. After applying at their office in person, this was all fine and dandy, but my uncle had been applying again and again for several months without success. Once, he was feeling particularly fed up with the system, so, being a bit of a fresh hothead, after being rejected for the umpteenth time, he proceeded to leave the desk and, in the next hallway, yank down his pants and drop a dump on the floor in the middle of the corridor. I was a cashier at Home Depot and some customers started giving me sass. I turned around, looked at another cashier and said, "Duck it, I have another job to do," and I left. Those people wanted me fired every time they came in. They actually walked up to me and told me, and I'm like, "That's nice. Have a good day," which of course made them angrier. Motorcycle rider is out having a ride on a beautiful morning. Vapid dingbat swerves into him, actually contacting his handlebar before noticing that there is a bike there. Rider didn't have time to slow down enough to avoid being hit. He manages to stay on his wheels, and the car speeds away. I get to a stoplight, and I'm just in time to see our hero ride up to the light, put down his kickstand, walk over and twist the mirror off the car. He drops it on the ground, mounts up, blows the light, no traffic at this time of day on a Sunday, and is gone. I'm an IT, and I was a network administrator for much of my career. I was the new guy on a team of 2, me and the senior network engineer. I had only been on the job a short time, but our employer was planning a massive upgrade of our campus-wide network. Early in the planning, our employer thought our engineer didn't have the experience to handle a project of this size, so they wanted to bring in an outside consultant. Our engineer said this was a waste of time and money. Anyway, at a kickoff meeting, they were laying out the timeline, budget, etc. And we found out that they had contracted the consultant. The engineer asked why, and they told him they thought he couldn't handle a project of this size. He calmly said, "Okay, your consultant can do the whole ducking project by himself," and walked out of the meeting. They then looked at me and asked if I could lead the project. I told them that if they thought he couldn't handle it, there was no way in hell I could. I heard from one of the managers. The boss was planning to fire me after I came back from lunch, so I just didn't come back after lunch. I was on my way to work one morning last month. It was snowing quite heavily and started to settle on the ground. I drove past a man on his own, probably in his 30s, just skipping down the road, full on arms swinging, a lot, no ducks given. He was glorious. We have a co-worker that has a garden so big he brings flowers to the office to make space. One time he brought gorgeous gigantic flowers that are very hard to tend, and I asked him how he grew them. "Well, my flowers are like me. They just grow when they're happy." The bloke is 80. He's retiring next week. Senior year in high school, we had to take a second standardized test, sort of a beta for a future version they were rolling out. Before the testing week, they gathered my class together and told us that no administrators could check our tests, and that we would not be getting individual grades. Instead, how well we did would determine how the test was handled next year. Our class as a whole decided to mark C for every question. They were so proud we finished the test 2 days ahead of schedule. We got Thursday and Friday off that week. The next year, we screwed up their figures so bad, they had to do another beta test. TLDR, don't tell seniors a test will not affect them at all. Good friend of mine ran out of money on a night out, was pretty drunk and didn't fancy the 3-mile walk home in the cold. Decided to smear some dirt on his face and then walked into the local police station and told them he'd been mugged and beaten up. The police took pity on him cause he's a little fella and gave him a lift home. Bloke has no shame at all. My daughter ducking loves feeding the army of ducks that live in the golf course behind our house. I try to get her to not to because bread isn't good for them. One time after I got out of the shower I saw her out on the back porch feeding the ducks our blueberry bread. I told her to stop and she looked at me and tipped the rest of the bag out to the mouths of what looked like 100 ducks. She is now the duck god. The other day I saw an old man with his wheelie cart trying to cross the street at a busy intersection. He had the walk signal but was walking so slowly that the light changed when he was in the middle of the crosswalk. Drivers started honking at him, but instead of hurrying across to the other side, the old man stopped, turned to face the line of cars and did a little old man dance, blocking traffic until the light changed back. Then he carried on walking like nothing happened. I was waiting at a bus stop on my way to school and I saw a guy in a suit skateboarding down the street in downtown Cleveland at 7 AM. Several years ago when I was in college I was at one of the approved smoking sections of the campus. I went to having a cigarette. A guy I recognized from one of my classes who was also there smoking got an important phone call, so he moved to the edge of the approved area to talk in privacy. One of the campus security guards, who was notorious for having a superiority complex, happened to be walking by at this time and told him to get back in the approved smoking area, which he was hardly 6 inches away from. The guy refused and politely tried to explain that the call was very important, personal, and he didn't want anyone else to hear. The security guard continued hassling him to get back in the approved area. This went back and forth for about half a minute or so. The guy finally got frustrated and said, "Dude, blow me." The security guard, very surprised, snarkily responded, "Excuse me, what was that you said? Baloney?" And the guy yelled, "No, I said blow me, you ducking asshole," really loud. The security guard's eyes got big and he stood there for a few seconds, then quickly walked away without saying anything. Turned out dude's mom was hit by a car the day before and was getting an update from the hospital about her condition. I'm not really sure if it counts, because it was me, but anyway, I happen to have the displeasure of working at the local Walmart. I'm a cashier and I had been working for 9 hours and I got off at 10 PM. So most people know that the light being on above a register means it's open, right? So here I am doing my happy, or I guess not so happy, thing, checking people out. At 9:55 I go ahead and shut my light out and have my current customer put my closed sign at the end of my belt and continue like normal. But this is Walmart. People are freaking idiots. So people continue to just come through. Some people even pointing at the sign and chuckling. And after about 15 minutes, 10:10 at this point, my CSM came up just telling me to finish up my line and go home. 10 more minutes go by and I'm finally done. And some mother ducker comes back down my line and unloads their ducking cart. So I did the only logical thing. I took my badge off and left, as this uncultured ass yells at me as I'm walking to the back to clock off. Not a single duck was given. I hate my job. In my calculus class in college, half the class just stopped coming after the second exam. Passed the drop deadline. Passed the withdraw deadline. 42 students just said duck this. We're out. Now, to be completely transparent, our professor was an arsehole who was retiring in a month. It was nice seeing my classmates say a collective FU. I wish I had done the same. My husband and I were in the car getting on the freeway in Brooklyn along with 2 other lanes of cars, and we honked at a man who was blatantly and slowly jaywalking right before the freeway entrance. The man lifted his head up, looked my husband dead in the eye, and slowly, but surely, raised a steady middle finger at us as he continued to jaywalk across 3 lanes of traffic. We burst out laughing on the freeway. Had to admire the dude for his absolute lack of ducks given. My grandmother is 88. Her dad died when she was very young, and as it was during the Depression and a single woman couldn't support 4 kids, she and her sibling were put into a children's home for most of their childhood. Her sister is a couple of years older and is her only family. Her brothers were on the boys' side and they rarely saw them. Took on a mothering role with her that never really stopped when they got older. My grandma loves her sister, but avoided her as they got older because it was annoying to be bossed around when she was a mother. Then grandmother. My grandpa passed away a month ago, and at the funeral my grandma was chatting to some friends. My aunt decided it was time to go upstairs and told my grandma so. For the first time ever, grandma turned to her and said, "You have been ordering me around for my entire life. Well, not today," and turned back to her conversation. It took her 83 years, but she finally stopped caring and told her big sister off. I guess losing the love of your life after 70 years takes all of your ducks away. I worked at a major movie theater chain. At the mall just up the road, I was cross-trained, taken and swapped shifts. Tried to be flexible as this type of job has a high turnover rate with students. I requested my birthday off, well in advance. Mind you, I've been getting at shifts since doing backbar. Double cloppin's kinda it. Week of comes around. Despite being granted my already approved time off, they have me working double shifts. I talk to the manager and shift scheduler. They say they'll fix it. They give me a completely off day off, but I'm still scheduled hard for my day. I looked her right in the eyes and just said okay. I quit. Never went back. This happened in my high school senior year. We have a substitute teacher. Normally they don't care what you do, but this one must have woken up on the bad side of hell. She begins class by telling us if we talk we get detention. Fair enough, she doesn't want to hear anything. Fast forward a bit, it's winter and the room feels like 1000 all from the radiator. He asks to open a window, she ignores him 3 times. He gets up to open it, she yells at him for not asking her. He tells her he did. Then it gets worse. The guy's on the right side of the room blasting rap and meme songs. She does nothing about this. 2 girls on the left side start doing work together. The sub immediately writes them up. One of the girls, let's call her Julie, starts telling the sub that she's unfairly targeting the good kids, but not the bad ones. She writes everyone up in the room, but she leaves the paper with the write-ups in the classroom room. One kid took that paper and we never heard from that sub again in that class. That kid was a legend. I went to a fairly strict Catholic high school and we had to wear uniforms except for 1 or 2 days a year that were free dress. The student body there was mostly Caucasian, but there was one cool senior guy that was Asian. I don't remember his name or actual heritage, plus I was a lowly sophomore. For free dress day he wore a shirt that said ancient Chinese proverb. Then it had 3 vertical lines of Chinese characters. I happened to be in line behind him at lunch and must have been leaning my head, because if you turned your head and read the shirt from the side it said, "Duck this it." That guy is still my hero. I was in high school in the 90s and a friend of mine named Devin started dating the ex-girlfriend of another guy. The former BF was jealous and during lunch a few days later, came up while I, my friend, and his new GF were eating lunch and just punched him right across the face. It was a solid hit and Devin was knocked right off his seat and onto the floor, spilling our drinks and most of our lunches in the process. He shook it off, got up, completely ignoring the ex, turned to his girlfriend and said, "I'm getting another drink. Do you want one too?"